The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards the
most radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour Government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on the Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts. Tēnā koutou katoa, this is Toby Manhire for a Gone By Lunchtime end of year special. Just me here today with Tina Tiller on the tools, and we spoke moments ago to the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. Annabelle Lee Mather and Ben Thomas aren't here, but I do throw some questions from them at the PM. I began by asking her if there was one day in 2020 that summed the year up or defined it or somehow stuck out in her memory.
There's actually just a whole period. There's whole blocks that, when I think back on 2020, I think back on February. That moment when I found out we had our first case in New Zealand, because I was in Australia, the Australian leadership meeting, an exchange over there with Scott Morrison, and I remember that very well. I remember, of course, the decision-making around the border and making that what felt like that hugely significant decision to shut down our border in stages and then in its totality. I remember the lockdown, the resurgence. There are these different points that I remember very well. If I'm picking one, there have been moments where we'll reach a really important milestone. Either we're coming out of a lockdown or, we've gotten close to, a milestone that no one else has reached. And then from time to time, I would get a call saying we had a positive case. Sometimes they weren't. Sometimes they were false positives. But that for me has been emblematic of what it's been like. You get somewhere and then suddenly you just have these setbacks. Now, our setbacks in comparison to other countries, there's no comparison, but it doesn't make it any easier. Yeah.
We, like everyone else, has sort of been thinking around how to sum up and review the year, and we thought we would do a time capsule in a kind of almost nostalgic sense, but also to bury the year in one quite literal form, and sort of have something quite seriously that people 100 years on can try and get their heads around what it was like. Could I ask you, would you be able to contribute something to that? And if you were to, what that might be?
Yeah, I just, when you said a time capsule, the first thing that came into my mind is not going to be what you expect. I thought of a whiteboard marker. It would require explanation for someone in the future.
Yeah.
During lockdown, every day I had a routine, like everyone did. I would walk from Premier House. I would come over to the Beehive. I would have my daily calls. I would get at a particular time the results for the day, and I had a whiteboard in the office, and that's where I tracked our case numbers, our testing numbers, also our stocks of testing equipment, our PPE equipment, and our reserves. I had all of that on a whiteboard in my office, and it was, for me, it was just waiting for the peak that we knew that we would have to reach before we came back down again, and just, that reliance on the signs that what we expected would happen with the virus did. So that whiteboard, that whiteboard was a very big deal to me.
Okay, we can't put the whiteboard in. That's not going to work practically, but we can put we'll put the marker.
We can't put my giant old school whiteboard into your time capsule. What are those ones that you slide? Those sliding whiteboards.
What are those sliding ones? Okay, I don't know if I know. I don't know if I can.
They've got they have printers attached to them.
Oh.
They're very old school.
Okay. I can't get my head around that, but I'm going to tell you word for it. This is a question from Ben Thomas, who we randomly stopped on the street and is a member of the Gone By Lunchtime podcast. His question for the Prime Minister is...
As a passerby?
Just an ordinary hard-working New Zealander,
Yep. Got it.
His question is this. Now that the handbrake is gone, can we stop spending public money to pay for gold carders' trips to Waiheke on the ferry?
That was the most pressing issue that he wanted to ask.
Well, he's an ordinary New Zealander.
Well, look, the one thing I'll say, and perhaps with a bit of prior knowledge on this one, having been a List MP working across Auckland Central, of course there are people who go across in order to visit, but there's also a lot of people who live on the island and use it, very legitimately to come back to Auckland for medical checkups and things that they need to do. So it's very hard to draw a distinction between those two, but it's not something I've given formal consideration to, I have to say.
Well, there's not going to. Now you've got through all the crises of the first few years, you can focus on the ferry issue.
Clearly.
Yeah.
Clearly.
Another ordinary New Zealander that we stopped was Annabelle.
For one moment, I have something stuck in my throat. I'm just going to try and clean it for you. Excuse me for... No, it's not a medical emergency, but excuse me for one...
Dr. Bloomfield.
One moment.
This is exciting. This is the most exciting thing ever to happen on the Gone By Lunchtime podcast. I hope this isn't some anaphylactic thing.
No, not at all. I think I have coffee grinds in my throat. I literally now I'm just drinking ground coffee straight.
Are you back on the coffee? Are you back on the coffee?
I am back on the coffee. This happened a while ago. This is a hangover from lockdown. Yep.
So you went back on the coffee during the pandemic
COVID.
Put you back on the coffee. Okay.
Yep.
And now you
coffee.
Okay. Wow. Annabelle Lee.
This is the story you were looking for.
I've already had several scoops these few short minutes. It's exciting times. The Annabelle Lee Mather has this question, which is perhaps slightly more serious. Do you think, in principle, that the next CEO of Oranga Tamariki should be Māori?
So, there's many ways I could answer this question. I think whatever we do in Oranga Tamariki has to be responsive and meet the needs of those most deeply affected by the organisation. And so, you'll see that we have a member of our Māori caucus is now the Minister for Oranga Tamariki, and that is a reflection of us knowing that we have to make sure that the system is working for those that it currently most deeply affects. So that's how I would respond to that. Whether or not I'm going to now then set the specific criteria of what that means for a CE, that's actually the principle that we'll be guided by. And then that's what we'll be looking for just generally for the way the organisation works. Calvin, though, asked for this portfolio. He many will remember the work that he did on family and sexual violence as an MP in opposition. He feels deeply about making sure that we are keeping families safe in New Zealand, but that we're also keeping them together. And so that's why he wanted to work in this area.
Thanks for that. A more base question, I guess, so I'm jumping around the show, is what do people like the Gone By Lunchtime podcast, pundits generally, that whole kind of class of people, do you think most misunderstand about the reality of politics, or most get wrong, or just don't get?
I think I don't for a moment think that it's actually unfair that any of those, when those misunderstandings or, when that exists, it's always for good reason, because most of the things that, the reality of politics are actually, it's the complexity of it. So we shouldn't reasonably expect that people would see that or appreciate that, because, just like you only come to understand or appreciate the culture of different organisations when you're in them. So the first thing is that for me to say where that exists, I'm not bitter about that. It's totally understandable. But one of the things that probably is for me the toughest is there's often very little distance between us and some of the things that many call for in terms of pace around climate change, housing, child poverty. These are all areas where we totally agree on the principle and the destination. What we have to do, and this occurred to me in a conversation I was recently having with some child poverty advocates, my perspective was, having watched and still seeing the aftermath of the 1990s, I want to make sure everything's fixed, because if we ever do anything that, for instance, further embeds structural deficits or gives an excuse for the next government to come in and just make these sweeping and deep cuts, we run the risk of leaving a legacy that's worse than when we started, because we are only just restoring now the cuts that were made, for instance, to government support in the 1990s. So when those reversals happen, they happen in a way that can leave scars for decades. So what I want to do, I want it to last. I don't want there to be political cycles to some of the changes that need to stick, and that means A, trying to build consensus, and B, doing it in a way that's sustainable. So that's probably one of the things that I know is really.
So sort of impatience
hard.
On the part of.
I understand. I have the same level of impatience, but at the same time, I have to balance that with making sure what we do is sustainable. Yeah.
I have a hard-hitting question.
For things like, particularly things like government support, because I hear people sometimes say use the COVID response and recovery fund. Those are like, for instance, using a savings account to spend on something that actually you need ongoing income from. Changes we made to government support aren't for 3 years or 4 years, they're forever. And you need to make sure that you have the ability to fund that sustainably, or that'll be the first thing to go.
This is a very
me the word.
Okay, I've got a hard-hitting question from Annabelle Lee.
Go ahead.
Annabelle Lee Matthew. I don't understand a word of it, but I'm going to read it to you. Do you use GMD or cloud straightening irons? And supplementary question, wide paddle or narrow paddle?
Great question. Narrow paddle, and this is your second breaking story for this interview. I'm currently using a Remington.
Whoa. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do have a wide paddle cloud, but it does not get used nearly as much as my little skinny Remington.
Okay, that's huge scoop. I'm going to squeeze one more in before Ellen rips the phone out of your hands. Finally, Fruju tropical snow. Do you have a view on that?
I like a Fruju tropical snow. However, there's no going past the classic Fruju. Yeah.
Okay.
I'd probably go for the classic over the snow, but I don't have a problem. I don't have an. I've always been a fan of the tart kind of range rather than the
lemon.
pineapple.
Grapefruit and lemon.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a winner.
Yeah.
Tropical snow isn't really a Fruju. Doesn't belong in the Fruju family. Perfectly fine.
I look. It's really kind of a cheap sorbet, isn't it? Really.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I hear you on that.
I think you speak for the
but
people
you haven't,
on that one.
You haven't covered the most groundbreaking thing that I've discovered this summer is the pre-made Goody Goody Gumdrop ice cream.
Oh yeah.
Dipped in chocolate.
Yeah. My daughter's into that. You got to You got to watch out for one of the bits that can fall out. I think if you've got a child.
See, I don't
son.
give them to my child. I eat them myself.
Oh my god! Everything was going so well.
There's nothing wrong with Goody Goody Gumdrops. It's just not too often.
All right. Okay, I'm going to let you get on with the important matters of state. Thank you for taking some time.
Thank you.
And very Merry Christmas to you.
No problem.
All right.
Same to you. Take care.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spin-Off. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spin-Off member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.